Yeah, this is the title of my talk. The title was very eloquently given there, so I won't go over it again. And it is using a case study from Iceland, the Andakílsá River to the west of here. I'm based in the UK, but I'm also working for an Icelandic company here that's just started. So my first slide was really a summary of a statement of what the nature-based approach or nature-based solutions are, but we've had quite a lot of discussion about what that is. I won't go over this in too much detail. It's quite an early definition of the nature-based solutions, but I think fundamentally it describes this connection between the human society and biodiversity, which is important, and fundamentally aligns with the Water Framework Directive and provides a mechanism for delivery of the objectives of the Water Framework Directive, I think. I don't want to go into the Water Framework Directive too much in great detail. It's not really my speciality these days, and you've heard a lot about it today. But in Scotland, just for context, nature-based solutions to river management and river engineering are at least considered neutral to morphological engineering impacts on ecological status, and in most cases actually positive. So through these metrics, there's actually an improvement to ecological condition by using this type of approach. Nature-based approach is already incorporated into environmental legislation in some countries, for example, Norway, and it would be a great benefit if this was more widely applied in an explicit way in Europe and throughout the world, really. I think an important point to make is it's important to avoid the potential greenwashing potential of the use of the term nature-based solutions. Already there's been some disingenuous use of the term, I think, in certain applications. So we always got to remember that the climate-nature crisis is an integrated physio-biogeochemical flows issue. It's not only an accounting problem. So very important to consider the wider objectives or the wider benefits of the nature-based approach. Is very much more than just accounting carbon credits. The resilience to providing resilience to climate change and biodiversity and societal benefits is fundamentally important, and that's really what it's all about. It's this whole range of multiple benefits that come from the nature-based approach. So I don't want to go and discuss this too much. There's been some good talks discussing the principles of the nature-based approach, but fundamentally it's really working with rather than resisting natural processes. In this case, I'm going to speak about river processes. It's fundamentally based at the catchment scale, the entire river environment, and by the river we mean the entire functional floodplain, and for full restoration we must consider the entire catchment, the whole drainage area, which includes land use change as well as in-channel and riparian management. They recognise the natural capital, the intrinsic value of the natural environment for human life, society, and also biodiversity. And I mentioned that it's not carbon counting, but these types of approach do tend to be associated with carbon storage. So utilising natural materials where feasible, also reinstating natural habitats which have a significant carbon storage benefit with them. Also, these approaches, especially in the UK at the moment, at least I can say, are preferred by the environmental regulators, and hopefully with further implementation with the Water Framework Directive will become more wholesale, that the nature-based approach is applied more broadly. But really importantly, and I've highlighted this here, it's all about, I think, the greatest benefit is the increased resilience to climate change and biodiversity. That's the fundamental point. That's why we should really be doing this in a very broad-scale way. So the case study I want to describe is some bank erosion works on the Andakílsá River to the west of here. So you'll notice, relating to the previous talk, it is a hydropower system. This is the powerhouse here, and it's not coincidental it's downstream from a hydropower. The issue is downstream from a hydropower scheme. And I'd like to sort of acknowledge the support of the hydropower company, On Power, who have who've allowed this work to go ahead and have really supported this and allowed this case study to be presented here today. So the immediate problem was to tackle the specific extents of bank erosion employing a nature-based approach, which is really about building a bank protection design using natural materials, and to consider local river processes to make sure we've built something resilient to the types of forces that the river can throw at it, including the effect of ice. But for a sustainable design, we really need to consider the wider scale catchment issues that are contributing to the bank erosion issue in the first place. So we need to tackle the cause as well as the symptom. That's really what the nature-based approach is about, is tackling the cause as well as the symptom. And the potential solutions, as I said, have multiple benefits, not just the bank erosion issue, but through the catchment, there's multiple potential benefits. And we did some integrated cost-benefit analysis to provide indices for how beneficial different types of option were, and I might have time to discuss that. But just to stress, this wider scale issue, this wider scale tackling of the problem is just conceptual case study at this stage. There's no obligation by One Power to do this. They've just allowed this as a very convenient case study to look at these multiple scale issues. So as I said, the Andakílsá River is in the west of Iceland. It flows from the headwaters from the lake here down to the hydropower intake in this location here. Then there's, this is the artificial hydropower reservoir, there's the powerhouse, and there's 4 tributaries that come in upstream of the reservoir, delivering significant amounts of sediment, and the size of the arrow depicts the relative amounts of sediment approximately coming into the system. And here's the section of bank erosion down here. This is where the bank erosion issue is, and not coincidental, it's downstream from the hydropower plant. So this is the site here. This is the section of bank erosion of concern around here. This is a geothermal pipeline that's a design constraint. There's the powerhouse, the intake structure, the associated head pond, the reservoir head pond, the Mainstem River going up to the lake, and then this is one, just about see one of the big tributaries coming in up there. So looking at the site in more detail, the original plan was to do a traditional hard rock bank protection. So this is what all these boulders are sitting here for. They were about to protect the bank here using a more traditional approach, but they were persuaded to go for a more nature-based approach. So those rocks remain there for a while. So the original alignment of the river was approximately through here. And what happened in the early 70s, there were some modifications made to the powerhouse location, and a large amount of sediment or material was dumped in this location here, and it basically directed the flow of the river towards the opposite bank, initiated this bank erosion, and over time we've had about 50 to 60 metres of bank erosion, which wasn't sustainable. So the bank erosion, like I said, was instigated initially by this unplanned sediment, artificial deposition. But also, and I mentioned before, it wasn't coincidental, it's downstream from a hydropower scheme. We've got this hungry water issue. What's hungry water? When rivers expend energy by transporting sediment, and if they're not able to transport sediment because the sediment's trapped in the reservoir, the river has excess energy in the flow and more potential for geomorphic work. And geomorphic work means sediment transport and bed and bank erosion. So that's what affects the bank erosion. But also just the trapping of sediment upstream, the lack of sediment supply to the downstream area. There's a net loss of sediment. Every time there's a flood, there's sediment moving away out of the reach downstream. It results in a general downcutting and incision of the channel bed, and we get destabilization of the bank. So these processes together have been the result, have caused the bank erosion. So we need to address the specific bank erosion issue, protect the banks, but also really address these root causes if we want a proper sustainable solution. So the sustainable solution for protecting the banks was the application of a large wood structure design. And large wood is as simple as it suggests. We incorporate large trees with root plates still intact into the bank to replicate the way that a river naturally protects its bank and mediates erosion. So there's 2 phases of work that have been undertaken. First phase completed in October 2021, a second in May 2022. So like I said, there was an initial hard rock approach, like the riprap, rock revetment, boulder placement was suggested. But we advise against this. It's not natural, it's not particularly sustainable, it's got a very significant carbon footprint associated with it, and it's often not very effective. These structures get undermined or outflanked. Here's 2 examples from Scotland here, where the river can't erode into its bank anymore, so it erodes the bed. These boulders fall in, and then it outflanks them behind. And another example here, same thing going on. The bank has been, the bed's been eroded, the material falls in, and the whole structure collapses. So we proposed this large wood structure design, So it's using natural materials, and it's really trying to replicate how banks naturally stabilize themselves, how erosion's mediated by wood naturally coming into the river system. And it's more effective at energy dissipation. It's an active protection. The root plates that are presented to the flow, their roughness interacts with the flow, and the turbulent forces dissipate energy. So that energy isn't translated downstream to the next area of unprotected bank, which is a problem with the more traditional rock approach. And also they're plastic. I don't mean they're obviously not made of plastic, but they're plastic in the sense that they deform and adjust with the channel. So there's a degree of adjustment that these structures can have. And as the channel evolves, they can adjust, unlike the large rock approach. So this is an example of the sort of thing we were talking about in cross-section. So this is the sort of previously steep eroding bank. And we'll remove this material and put these sort of whole tree structures, maybe 5 or 6 meters length of trunk with the root plates still attached, and we set them into this foundation of cobble-sized material. And we do use large boulders. The boulders are used, they're not presented to the flow. The boulders are used for ballast to hold the trees in place. Then the soil's put back in, reprofiled to a sort of more stable 1 to 2 or 1 to 3 angle. And then the turfs that were taken off the top are reinstated, so immediately we've got some protection of this fresh bank surface from the turfs. So this is the site at Andakílsá. It was quite significant erosion. There was about 3 meters from the top of bank to the water surface, and about another 3 meters down to the adjacent bed. So it's a very significant vertical extent. And these are the materials that were used, the trees that were used, the 5 or 6 meter length of trunk. The root plate still attached. These are the boulders that were used for ballast. In the background here, you can see the piles of cobbles that are used for the foundation material. And this is the material getting implemented here. So here's one of the trees here going into the bank. The root plates presented to the flow. There's a second tier up here, a 2-tier structure. Boulder holding the trees in place here. This is the cobble foundation, and then we have the backfilling of the soil material, and over the top the turfs go in. And this is the site just last weekend. So already after 2 months, you can see the turfs have really taken off. They're sort of, they're growing nicely. But we're also able to incorporate tree saplings, native tree saplings within the bank. So that's really kick-starting this process of the tree roots providing this cohesion to the bank and providing natural protection. And over time, this is how it becomes sustainable. Over time, the large trees that are in the bank aren't there forever, but over time, these native trees that will establish will become the next source of wood into the channel margins to protect the bank. So over the next 30, 40, 50 years, this sort of, this more natural riparian habitat will protect itself. So this is the site as it was last weekend. As I said, so it's had already one significant flood and it's entirely stable. But we still need to require to manage the sediment delivery, because without that, without addressing this broader scale issue that's responsible for the bank erosion problem in the first place, the sediment, the erosion problem will continue. So, but we need to get just the right amount of sediment supply to make this a stable reach. Too little and the channel incision will continue. There's still the excess energy, so we'll get destabilisation of the banks. And too much will get increased sediment storage, so excessive alluvial bar growth. That will be associated with significant lateral hydraulic process. And again, increased risk of bank erosion. Perhaps not in this location here, but maybe downstream. So we've got to make sure we get the right amount. So to get the right amount or determine what that is, we'll undertake like sediment budget assessment and our morphodynamic sediment transfer modelling to objectively determine that sediment supply regime that we need to have a stable equilibrium reach downstream. So I now want to go quickly onto another issue, and this is dealing with the sediment management issue at hydropower schemes. Now, historically, most hydropower schemes didn't have a sediment management plan. The sediment just entered the reservoir and was just left there until the point that the scheme became uneconomical. But there's various methods to manage this, and the simplest one is just the simple excavation and translocation of sediments. So what we're trying to do is reinstate that conveyor belt of sediment that's very important for ecological process downstream, and also important for the economic functioning of the scheme. So this very simple approach of excavation and translocation of sediments is not very sustainable. It requires machinery to go in periodically, it's expensive, it's got a significant carbon footprint associated with it. So the ideal option is design or retrofit hydraulic structures, or potentially entirely remove the hydraulic structures if they're redundant. And in combination with that, another approach is to tackle the amount of sediment. If there's excess sediment, as there often is, coming into these river systems, is to renaturalize land use in the upper catchment. And that can be done in combination with the other two methods. I'm going to focus on quick case studies of both of the retrofitting example and the renaturalization example very quickly. And just to say again, just stress, this is a concept for a case study. Andakílsá, there's no obligation of the hydropower regulator to deliver any of this. This is a convenient case study. So this is the reservoir at Andakílsá. Here's the intake here, and this is the spillway structures, the old natural channel. So we need to, based on understanding of the spatial patterns and rates of sediment accumulation, we need to develop a design to assist in the natural transfer of the material downstream over the spillway structure and down to the channel downstream. So ideally we should consider that the earliest stage of design of the structure, but that rarely happens. But new hydropower schemes should consider this, but often retrofitting is all we can really manage. Now, Andakílsá project, we've got to try and match the amount of sediment coming over the structure as to the amount we've determined is needed downstream for the stable bank protection design. So we need to come up with a method or a design that marries those two sediment transfer rates. So this requires site-specific design that integrates the performance of the hydraulic structure along with a detailed understanding of geomorphic process. And that means, again, sediment budget, sediment transport modelling. So in the case of Andakílsá, conveniently, most of the coarse sediment is accumulating here, just upstream of the spillway. So the idea is to retrofit a variable elevation invert on the spillway crest to, under high flow conditions, allow sediment to transport naturally downstream. So this is the spillway crest here. It's under drawdown conditions, and you can see the sediment that's built up with the coarse sediment. So the idea would be to periodically lower the crest of this the elevation of this spillway crest to allow sediment to naturally move downstream. So here's an example here. Lower the spillway crest elevation during sufficiently high flow events. It has to be done at high flow events. So we increase the water surface slope, the energy gradient over here, and that allows for the transport of coarse sediment over the spillway crest and downstream. So a very quick example of how we might retrofit a structure. I mean, every scheme will be different, but this is a specific example of what could be done at Andakílsá. And very quickly, because I don't have much time, I want to go to the next scale, looking at the renaturalization of the upstream catchment. And this is very much a nature-based sustainable approach to try and reinstate natural river and riparian processes at the broader catchment scale, dealing with land use issues. And it's really managing the cause of sedimentation issues that are the fundamental problem in the system. Andakílsá River has a very elevated sediment yield because of a number of issues relating to land use. So this approach essentially aims to reduce the excessive rates of sediment supply in the upstream river network, effectively by establishing a more native vegetation, at least in the riparian corridor, but also try and store more sediment within the river corridor through increased channel roughness. So rather than having the sediment just move straight through the system into the mainstem river, into the reservoir downstream, to increase channel roughness, for instance, by using large root structures to store more sediment for longer periods of time within the channel. And again, there's all these additional significant benefits of this renaturalization of the upper catchment. It's not just about the hydropower scheme. So this is the upper Andakílsá River here, and again I've showed this photograph before, but here's the 4 tributaries delivering a large amount of sediment. Now it's a very heavily, intensively managed riparian area here. There's no native vegetation. They're very significantly artificially drained, and the river, especially the Calda, this tributary, delivers very large amounts of sediment, unnaturally high amounts of sediment into the system. So here you see the river here, you see that it's got this very, very simple vegetation, this sort of grass monoculture vegetation relating to grazing for mainly horses. So there's no native bankside tree cover, so there's issues of bank stability. The banks are very unstable, a lot of erosion coming from the banks. Very little channel roughness, you don't get much storage of sediment for any length of time in the river, it just gets pushed straight through here with every flood event. Enhanced drainage, as I said, in the channel network, which makes more efficient hydrology. And also you'll notice down here, artificial gravel extraction, that's just destabilising the channel. The channel is becoming destabilised. And all of these factors lead to significant channel incision. You'll see the river has dropped significantly below its floodplain level, and all of that sediment has been liberated, has ended up in the reservoir. So there's enhanced sediment supply to the Mainstem River, and important for ecology, the river is very disconnected from its floodplain. The river very, very rarely, if ever, connects with its floodplain. There's obviously significant ecological issues associated with that. So very quickly, I think, because I've got just about out of time, I'll just, this is one last slide here. So this is one example that we did in the Scottish Highlands, looking at the similar sort of issues. This is a stream called the Altlorgie in the Cairngorm Mountains. So here with this canalised river, very efficient at delivering sediment downstream, and it's causing problems blocking a culvert under a road and causing flooding issues. So the river is disconnected from its floodplain. There was an embankment along here. Very simple riparian vegetation, just a few very mature Caledonian pines. A very little storage of sediment in the channel, very efficient channel. So the idea was to remove the embankments, allow the river to connect to its floodplain, put some large wood in the channel to help store sediment for longer periods of time to stop that delivery of sediment downstream, and also regenerate the native vegetation. And this is what it looked like after 8 years, just doing those very simple things. We're not doing much engineering at all, just letting the river do the work itself. So the large wood structure, which you can't see anymore because it's buried, has created this storage of sediment, this bar feature, much greater physical diversity in the channel. The river's much better connected to its floodplain now because the embankment's gone. Also the bed's built up, so it's much, the river breaks its banks much more frequently. And also this regeneration of riparian vegetation has very significantly improved the ecology, but also strengthened the banks. There's less sediment supply and also greater storage. There's much reduced sediment supply downstream, and the culvert that was causing the problem wasn't a problem. So this is the sort of thing that can be applied at the catchment scale to try and, any sort of sediment management issues can be tackled very effectively with this type of land use change approach. And this is just in the riparian corridor. If it was expanded to the whole catchment, it would be much greater effect. So I'm over on my time, so I'm just going to quickly just put those conclusions up and you can read them. And I don't even have to give my last slide, which is my acknowledgements, but thanks very much.